Welcome to another edition of Living Legacies. I'm Tom Morrow. Today we're talking with Margret Merlock of Oceanside, who has had a fascinating life. And Margret, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, you were born in Germany.
Right.
And what part of Germany?
Actually, I was born near Cologne in Duisburg-Hamborn. And then my parents moved to a town in the Harz Mountains called Thaler. And we lived there for a while until we moved to another town called Goslar, also in the Harz Mountains.
Now, without being too nosy about your age, this was during the war or right before the war?
This was during the war, correct.
Yeah, and did you experience any of the fighting that was going on, or was your city bombed, or did you go in through any?
Yes and no. You know, we lived in an area that was more rural, but the bombers came across. That's what I do remember, is the air raid alarms and the bombers coming across, and they would head towards Dresden or Leipzig, and Halberstadt was another one very close to us where they would drop bombs. And that was a scary time. You know, you have to look at it from my perspective. I was a child, so my images of the war are totally different what people perceive today. I mean, most Americans really do not know what war is like, or what hunger is like, or loss, that kind of bombing where your house is going. So I do remember that really well. And
even though you're in the country, was food scarce?
It was after the Russians pulled in. That's why we left. But the bombers themselves, what was kind of neat, they dropped. My brother and I used to go outside to watch the Christmas trees come down. That's what we called them, Christmas trees. And they were magnesium flares, and they would float down really slow, and the whole countryside was lit up. It was like daylight. And it was really beautiful to see, but you could also see at the same time the airplanes, that would be the first plane coming through. And then the others would come, more than one, many. And then you could see where the doors were open and they were ready to, but they didn't drop them over our house, I mean, in our town.
It lit up the target.
Yeah, but it lit up the target, and they knew where they were going, and it was not this little town. It just was not that big.
Well, you found out sometime later that there was a POW camp nearby.
That was interesting. My sister and my brother-in-law, we went back to Germany about 5 years ago. Well, we've gone back regularly, but we wanted to see where we lived and what I remembered from the town. And we found my old house, and it was because it was at the edge of town. And I told my sister, I said, I remember a train going by the house, and there were no train tracks. And the one lady there said, oh yeah, there used to be a train coming across here. And so we knew we were in the right spot. And she mentioned that there was a POW camp close by. I don't know where exactly it was.
But you had a little bit of experience with the
you know, the POWs, we didn't consider them POWs. So the very first Americans I met were 5 American soldiers that my mother, and maybe my grandmother was there visiting, had hidden in a chicken coop on our property. And you know, to this day, I don't know why this was done by my mother, because she was through and through German. But my brother and I used to go down and bring them some food in a little basket to take some food, and they were so grateful. They were really nice men. We didn't speak any English, and they didn't speak any German, but they were grateful for the food that we brought them. And I can remember them giving us small green cans that had food in it. So I think maybe during World War II they must have had food in green cans.
So you don't know whether those 5 Americans were POWs or
no? Well, I'm assuming that they were American soldiers, so they could have escaped from there, which was what my sister and I sort of thought about, but we don't know.
Well, if the Russians were in that area, they probably would have had to have been POWs.
This was before the Russians came. So it was still during, So. Yeah.
But I don't think the Americans were that far into Germany at that point.
It's hard to tell. I don't know who they were, what they were.
But you had mentioned that your parents, they didn't want to talk about anything.
No, absolutely not. They did not talk about the war.
Yeah.
And I'm sure my father, in a way, had the post-traumatic stress, is that PTSD?
Yeah.
Because he was never the same after the war.
Now, he was on the Russian front?
Yeah, he got hurt on the Russian front. And he was actually on a wagon for dead people, and somebody pulled him off because he had stepped on a landmine. So his right side, his arm, he lost a bone in this arm, and he never was able to do anything with his arm. And he had damages to his right leg and foot. So he was in a hospital a long time, but they pulled him off that wagon, and he was able to come back home again. But I think, when I think about him now, how much damage he had mentally, because he was changed. He was very strict, and he would always return to his room after dinner, and communication was limited. My father was tough, but distant.
Yeah. When the Russians came in, they overran the eastern part of Germany. Was the war still going on when you and your family tried to escape?
Well, I think it was over to a certain point, because we had tried to escape. We actually escaped in end of summer. But I think
this is in 45?
45,
yeah.
Correct. And my mother and I had gone down to the bank to get some money, and the Russians were there and told us that the bank was closed permanently. So that was a real shock to my parents, that there was nothing. Food stores were absolutely looted. The Russians, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but they were very, very cruel, extremely cruel. I saw them shoot animals, horses. We lived at the edge of town, so cattle and things came on the road past us, and if you didn't move past the road to move along, they would just shoot you. It was a very bad memory for me to see that, and most children don't see that now.
Oh,
yeah. So when my mother said, we have to leave town, we cannot stay here anymore, because, and she had gone, I'm backtracking here. I have a brother that was born in 45 in January. And at that time, it was still able for my mother to cross back and forth, but food was already limited, because we would forage in the fields for potatoes after it had been, picked over. And she went to my grandmother's place and left my brother with my grandmother because she couldn't feed us. So he was already technically in the British zone at that point, but it hadn't been, divided up yet.
When you escaped in 45, when I say you moved from the Russian zone into the British zone?
Correct.
And what do you remember about that trip?
That was, my mother made the decision to move. We wore like 3 or 4 sets of clothes, all, put on as much clothes as we could do. My sister was 3, yeah. So she was the youngest, and my mother had engaged a guide to help us over the mountains with another family. And it was a person who knew the area, because the Harz Mountains are a beautiful area, but there's also many steep crevices where you could just drop off, and we knew we had to travel at night. So we hid in the haystacks in the daytime, and carried whatever we could with us, and then we walked at night. And my sister, this is so real yet, because we weren't allowed to talk, because we knew the Russian soldiers were there with dogs and guns, and we knew what they could do.
Even though you were little kids and prone to talk, you knew better.
We knew we couldn't talk, no.
Yeah.
We had to be absolutely silent at night. And my sister was getting tired, and my father was not all that well yet. He was still walking with the cane. So we would tell my sister, my mother would do this, she said, go on, behind the next tree is Großmutti, my grandmother. So she would go to the next tree, and then she would look disappointed because my grandmother wasn't there. But that's how we sort of got her to walk at night without having to carry her most of the time, behind the next tree. I'll never forget that. never.
How long did it take you to get to...
You know what? I don't know. I cannot tell you.
Do you remember how you knew that you were in the British zone?
Yeah, because we were all, it was such an exhausting trip for everybody. You could sleep when you could, and in the daytime you had to be alerted. And in the daytime when you could see it was warm because the macadam on the road had the tank treads, you could see the tank treads on the road. So different memories that a child has than an adult.
So was there a...
oh, you could see the tanks going by.
Yeah, but I mean, you knew then when you were in the British zone.
Yeah, well, it was war also, and the British were also different, but they weren't cruel.
Not quite as cruel.
They weren't cruel, but my mother and I went to where she used to live in this wonderful old fortress. That was my mother's place, and she grew up in this Svinga. And I remember going with her to watch the British soldiers loot this old building. And I remember they threw furniture down the steps, but my grandfather lost us after the war. So I don't know whether the war or the reason that he lost it, but he was a collector of armor and chainmail. My mother used to play in those. She used to tell us how she played with chainmail as a child, and some of the torture chambers, they had like a door that you could shut and had nails in it, and if you were inside of that closet, you'd get nailed.
When all of this happened, though, Germany had already surrendered. The war had ended.
This was after the surrender.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, did you ever have to go to a refugee camp, or were you able to stay in the
No,
cities?
we were just fortunate that my grandmother had a place to live, and we all bunked in together, and it was tight quarters, but it was good. And that was the town called Goslar in the Harz Mountains, and it's just a beautiful old town, and it's over 1,000 years old. The Kaiser used to have a place there.
Have you gone back?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Actually, I took the one grandson with me one year. He was out of school, and he was over there, and I said, "I'll meet you, and I'll show you where I grew up." So.
What year did you come to the States?
In '49.
In '49.
And in all this, with relatives, we found out that my grandmother said that she had like a second cousin that had come to America in 1895, something like that, and they had moved to Philadelphia.
So that was your sponsor?
And that was our contact, and they started writing to them, and for a few years between 45 and 49, they were sending packages, I remember care packages, really?
I remember
care
those.
packages.
Yeah.
And we used to get those, and we would get coffee, and my mother used to be thrilled to get coffee from America, so yeah.
We're going to take a break for a few minutes. We were talking with Margret Merlock of Oceanside. We'll be right back after these messages.
Plant inspiration. Provide youth with the creative tools and skills to cultivate it. And you'll be amazed at what can grow. Adobe Youth Voices and the Peapod Foundation. Learn more at plantandinspire.org.
Hands can do incredible things. Now they can even help save a life with hands-only CPR. If you see an adult suddenly collapse, just call 911, then push hard and fast in the center of the chest until help arrives. Learn more at handsonlycpr.org.
We're back with Margret Merlock. We were talking about how you came to the States. You had cousins over here, and they had supplied you with care packages for 3 or 4 years. Now, did they sponsor you to come into the States?
They sponsored us, and it was, my father was born in South America, in Chile, so in '49 there was a very tight quota, but because he was born in Chile, we were able to come in the quota from Chile. If we had
right?
So if we had to come in from the quota from Germany, we would not have been able to come in. So my grandmother could not come with us because she was born in Germany. So we came here in '49, and they brought us to their beach house in Surf City on Long Beach Island. And we lived in Surf City from August until December, until my uncle found a job for my father in Philadelphia as a dishwasher.
You told me something I thought was amazing, and I'd like to hear your experiences about it. You and your siblings were entered into school, and you couldn't speak one word of English.
That's correct. You know, we knew a song. I think it was called "My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean," which was wrote that we picked up on the ship coming over. But we
the clean version or the dirty version?
No, no. I didn't know there was two. I didn't know there were two versions. But no, we came over and we spoke no English, and you know, we wanted so hard to be Americans. You have no idea, because Germans were not liked very much in '49. Germans were absolutely hated. So, I mean, Philadelphia itself, most of the names were changed that had anything to do with German. So none of us wanted to be a little Nazi. So we made every effort to learn English as quickly as we could. So, and you know, I didn't miss any school time. It was, school is school. You know, you can pick up math, and reading was hard, but other than that, we learned very quickly. And so,
how were you treated by the other children?
The other children were good to us. Beach Haven was my first school, and our first Christmas, that whole community took up a collection for this German family that had left everything behind to come to America. And we had a Christmas like I have never had in my life. They had just collect, and you know, for us it was new. You know, we live in such a disposable society nowadays that most people don't appreciate used goods as much as they should.
Now, you graduated from high school in Jersey?
Yes, we moved from Philadelphia to New Jersey.
And then you went on to nursing school?
Nursing school. I went back to school in Philadelphia. I liked being a nurse. I was happy to go into nursing, and I'll always be a nurse to the core.
Now, when did you get married?
I got married in 1960.
And was it? Had you moved to California yet, or?
Yeah, we moved just shortly thereafter. 2 years after. Yeah, a few years after that.
Well, let's jump ahead to '75 when you moved here to Oceanside, and I think that you had somewhat of a traumatic experience when you first found out you were next to Camp Pendleton.
I did, very much so. We moved here in February, and that's the month that I think the Camp Pendleton has their big maneuvers where there's a lot of bombing and noise. And I went back to being a child, and all of a sudden I couldn't deal with it. I broke out in a rash from my neck to my toes, total. I mean, and I was just going crazy. I could not deal with it. So I went back to Torrance, where we used to live, and actually I got admitted to the hospital over there because the rash was so bad. They had to put me in sterile sheets. That's how bad it was. So I was a nervous wreck. It took me a while to come back here. I think it took 2 weeks to come back. But I could not deal with that bombing that was going on. And it took me back to things I didn't want to remember. And I know there are things that just thinking about doing this program that I don't want to remember that came back.
How did you get by all of that?
Well, I had some really close friends in Torrance that helped me through this.
Yeah. So now it doesn't bother you?
Well, they had some bombings about 2 weeks ago that were louder than normal. And
the shakers?
Yeah, the shakers. Yeah, the windows rattle, and I was kind of, but I'm okay now. Yeah. You know, I'm okay now with.
Well, my wife, she says that's the sound of freedom.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the way she looks at it.
And I'm all in support of the military anyway.
Now, you spent many years in nursing, but one of the things that you are noted for around here is your many trips down into Central and South America to help children.
Right.
Explain that. Tell me a little bit about
I got involved in '76 with a group called Interface, And Dr. Suzuki right now from Escondido and Poway is in charge of that program. And it was part of UCSD in their plastic surgery division program, where they would go into different parts of Mexico to do lip and palate surgery on children. And I've been doing it now since 1976, so quite a while. And I love it. The work is extremely long days, hard work. In the beginning, things
were rewarding.
Rewarding. There's nothing like seeing a child come into the operating room with a terrible cleft palate or cleft lip, which is more visible, and then to have them come out of the recovery room and they're just, you know, they look normal. And they're...
Explain to me, a lot of people might ask this question, and I've always wondered about it. What causes that?
You know what, I cannot tell you that.
Because you don't see that much of it in modern countries like us.
I think it is here, but we have the capabilities of fixing it right away.
Yeah.
Because you can operate on a lip very early, at a very young age. Mm-hmm. But the children, you know, one day, I always look at it, one day a child, you know, Americans in general are not all that well liked around the world. I mean, we do wonderful things. We're the first to respond for any major catastrophe. But, you know, someday that child in Mexico or other places is going to say, you know, maybe Americans aren't so bad. They made my face better. Mm-hmm. And that's how I look at it. You know, you make a difference one child at a time. And that's how we look at it.
What are some of the countries that you've been to help children?
I went with a group from Denver to China, to the central part of China where they had never even had Americans there before. And we did surgery on children so they could be adopted by other people in the rest of the world. But most of the work has been in all the parts of Mexico: La Paz, Mexicali, Guaymas, Tuxtla Gutierrez and Chiapas, Merida. I mean, many places where we have been. And currently we just go now to La Piedad in Michoacan. And
now you've been to Guatemala.
Yeah, I was just in Guatemala 2 weeks ago, and it was more or less a combination vacation and doing a little bit of volunteer work. Mm-hmm. There's a group there called Mayan Families that does a lot of wonderful work with the locals. So I took a huge duffel bag of medical supplies, and I took knitting needles and yarn, and actually I taught the women there. They all can crochet beautifully, but they weren't that good at knitting, so I taught them how to knit, and they were quite happy. Mm-hmm. And I did the same when I went down to Ecuador. I visited a friend that was finishing up in the Peace Corps, and she said, "Come to my village, you're used to primitive conditions." And I taught the children there how to knit. And that was really fun because those children really wanted to learn.
Now, I noticed that from the many pictures that you brought in, there was a picture of you at Machu Picchu in Peru. How was that trip?
That was one of the highlights. You know how you have a bucket list? Mm-hmm. That was one of my places. I like archaeological places, so I've been to most of the ones in Mexico, and I wanted to see Machu Picchu. And then while I was there, I thought, well, I'm down this far, I might as well go to the Galapagos. So I went there also.
That had to be a fascinating trip.
It was unbelievable to be in that environment of this old ruin that has a history of so much of it is unknown, and that's what I like about it.
The Galapagos is like nowhere else on Earth.
It was unbelievable. You're walking among giant tortoises and big lizards that don't care if you're there or not.
The Ecuadorians, I think it's Ecuador.
Ecuador, right.
Yeah, they're taking pretty good care of it, aren't they?
Oh, yes. It's very limited. You can't just walk off a path, and you have to stay on and you can't just pull a boat up anywhere where you want to. You have to just go by the rules, and I think rightly so you should.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Now, are you still making trips down into Mexico on a regular basis?
Yes, actually, Interface has a big trip coming up in February where we go into La Piedad, Michoacan, and that is 4 or 5 days we go.
Now, a lot of people think that when you take these trips that they're sponsored or somebody's paying your way, but I understand you pay your own way.
Yes, you do pay your own way. And I have a friend in Colorado that when I took my granddaughter, she was really good. She sent the money for my granddaughter to go along. So my one granddaughter has been with me 2 times down there, and they loved her because she's tall, blonde, and they called her their American daughter, blue-eyed daughter. So yeah. So hopefully I can talk her into going again in February, because it is an unbelievable experience.
How do you find out about these places and where you need to be going?
They have the local support in this particular town is incredible. The Saldana family and the Garcia family, they make sure that before we come down there, they've advertised on the radio, they've done everything ahead of time to line up the patients. There are hundreds of patients waiting for us at the Cruz Roja at the Red Cross Hospital.
Do you ever have to leave before you get all the work done?
Oh, that happens sometimes, yes.
I bet that's tough to do.
It's tough to do, yeah, but you know, we can only do so much because we just go, go, go. Mm-hmm. And sometimes at the end of the day, you just can't do another patient. And the thing is, I'm recovery room, so they could do the surgery, but that means I would not get out of there until midnight or after.
Yeah, yeah. Now, do you stay with families when you go down there?
No, actually, the Saldana family, Armando, he's really unbelievable. They pay for all our hotels. There's a new Holiday Inn now that's been built in the last few years. They pay for our hotels. They make us comfortable. They take care of all our meals. Mm-hmm. It is unbelievable how well we are treated there.
Well, if people here watching the show wanted to do something to help, what would be the easiest, or what would be a way that they could do that?
Because we're totally volunteer, I think if they were to send a donation to Interface, and that would be going to, Dr. Suzuki. You can look it up on the internet. Interface.
It's not interfaith, it's interface.
Interface.
Like interface.
Face, yeah. Uh-huh. So INTERFACE, but it's on the internet, and that money goes directly to buy medicines and do the things we need to do, update.
Now you make it a point to speak to a lot of service clubs explaining some of the things that you're telling me here.
I've gone to the Rotary a few times, yes.
Yeah. And that's a good way to get the story out.
It's a good way to get the story out, and they're very generous. Rotary Club in La Piedad actually is one of the people that sponsors a dinner for us.
Well, very good. Yeah.
So.
Now this is your time to do what you asked me if it would be all right to do.
Yes, Tom. When I finish a meeting or a speech or a little to-do at the Rotary Clubs or other things, I tell people there's this little poem that sort of guides you or me, and it says, "There is a destiny that makes us brothers. None goes his way alone. All that we send into the lives of others comes back into our own."
And with that, we'll say goodbye. We've been talking with Margret Merlock of Oceanside. I'm Tom Morrow. Join me here again next time on Living Legacies.